I mean, I could quote some Popper at this point, and I certainly think Popper's immortal line about the way that tolerant people will vanish if we tolerate intolerance continues to be relevant, by which I mean if you do not have a public arena, a public life, a society in which there is, if you like, a kind of institutional tolerance of a diversity of views, then you are in a very difficult position vis-a-vis, the ideal of the kind of the battle of ideas, the genuine freedom to choose between genuine alternatives, and so on. And indeed, referencing people in this room again, Nigel has written A Guide to Free Speech, which very eloquently sets out many of the debates around where and how the marketplace in ideas does and doesn't function, the kind of ideal, which we can't live up to, but the ideal being that you have many different views expressed, and that a kind of free combat and free choice between them is the way to do democracy. I guess I would say one thing about kind of critical thinking democracy today, which is technologically related, which is that it is very, very, very challenging to most ideas around democracy, free speech and free thought when we have the complete atomization and personalization of the informational arena, by which I mean in social media when people are getting their news and information online, everybody can exist within a more or less kind of precisely tailored sort of filter bubble in which information is most likely to reach them if it is tailored to their preferences and history and contacts and so on. And you don't know what other people are seeing. So broadly speaking, unless you really go out to find it, what the alt-right are getting worked up about is not immediately visible to people on the other side of the political spectrum and so on. And one of the problems is that if in a democracy what we're essentially hoping is that there will be a reasonably informed, reasonably free debate and presentation of different ideas which people are able to see, challenge and choose between, all of these things that are to some degree rendered problematic by a lot of the features of kind of a technological society, because the information we get is pre-filtered by systems that are inscrutable to us, because we don't all see the same thing, because a lot of the incentives embodied in these systems, not all of them, but some of the incentives effectively reward emotional impact over truth content, and because the presentation of, sort of a counter-argument, not that rational argument has always dominated politics by any means, but we do not necessarily ever even see any kind of a rebuttal. And so I think we have a very kind of challenging arena at the moment, because above all of our inability really to commonly debate and scrutinize and know what other people are thinking. And so we see what you might call the kind of hijacking of political processes by extremes, by movements and so on. I wouldn't want to just deplore all this and say, oh, this is absolutely terrible, it's the end of the world. But I think it's very challenging to notions of democratic legitimacy. And I guess the last thing I'd say is just this very general point that freedom is not just a kind of unfettered consumerist choice. I think, meaningful freedom and freedom worth having, you need to be given meaningfully different options about which you are meaningfully informed and upon which you are kind of meaningfully able to act. I've used the word meaningful, I made it all rather circular, but all of these conditions can fail to be met if you are presented with only that stuff which is kind of adjusted to suit your preferences, in which your choices are restricted to options offered by a particular kind of system that doesn't display the full spectrum, which have no idea what anybody else is doing. So I think we have a lot of debate ahead of us as to how we cope with this informational and decision-making environment.